sea levels that we haven't even thought about yet.
Could this be our fate? Is Antarctica heading for a major meltdown? If so, it may happen over centuries. But it could already be starting because the climate is changing. And it's changing because burning fossil fuels has increased the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Today, we have something that's completely man-made, and that is the addition of carbon dioxide being put into the atmosphere by humanity, by us.
Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It prevents the sun's heat from escaping.
I'm in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, in a greenhouse. Greenhouses, they're basically like heat motels, where the sun's rays can come in and they get trapped inside the greenhouse. They can't get out.
So like glass in a greenhouse, gases like carbon dioxide trap solar energy in our atmosphere. But now, those levels are increasing.
The result is our Earth is now warming up.
And the ice is melting, both in Antarctica and the Arctic.
In the north, there's two clear signals. In the Arctic Ocean, you have lots of floating ice and not sticking around through the summer. That's one sign of it getting warmer. The other sign, the edges of the Greenland ice sheet are changing.
And the loss of Greenland's ice is now speeding up. In August 2010, an iceberg 4 times the size of Manhattan broke off the edge of Greenland. But Antarctica has nearly 10 times as much ice as Greenland. And in the past decade alone, rising temperatures have caused giant pieces of coastal ice to shrink or crumble. Polar researchers feared that this could be just the beginning of a chain reaction. But have Antarctica's ice sheets ever collapsed before? That's what an international team of geodetectives wants to find out.
Here we actually have some running water, some meltwater coming out of the ice.
To get a more precise picture of Antarctica's future, they plan to dig deep for answers in the past with a giant drill.
By drilling into areas around Antarctica, we're able to perceive a history that has an impact for where we're headed as a planet.
Antarctica was not always locked in a deep freeze. 160 million years ago, it was part of an enormous supercontinent closer to the equator. At the time, Earth was much warmer than today, and fossil evidence suggests this giant landmass was a tropical habitat teeming with dinosaurs. Eventually, the supercontinent broke apart and Antarctica drifted south. As Earth was getting colder, falling carbon dioxide levels and powerful ocean currents cooled the isolated continent even further. And then, around 34 million years ago, ice slowly began to form. It would take millions of years for Antarctica to finally lock into a deep freeze. And during that time, it remained warm enough for plant life to survive. Evidence of that was recently unearthed in a relatively ice-free valley in the interior. Here, geologists Alan Ashworth and Adam Lewis find a remarkable fossil.
Oh, a leaf. Is that a leaf? There's a leaf right there. Hey!
That leaf fell into the mud maybe 20 million years ago.
That may be the best leaf yet.
That's a sweet leaf.
And then they find something extraordinary.
This is like a peat moss. And then if we, tease some of this out, they're like freeze-dried.
Under the microscope, these brittle mosses are in pristine condition. These moss fossils are not rock, but actual plant tissue, the last vestiges of vegetation from a time when Antarctica was still warm. They were found under a layer of volcanic ash that dates back millions of years.
This is the original moss tissue, and even the cells are preserved in these fossils.
These plants were flash frozen when Antarctica plummeted into a deep freeze that preserved them until today.
It's mind-boggling. The only way is to say the climate remained very, very cold, it remained very, very dry, and it did not warm up for even relatively short periods of time in this location. Otherwise, these things are gone.
Now, as Earth is heating up, what will happen to Antarctica? Will it melt, raising sea levels all over the planet? How sensitive is this frozen land to the temperature changes we currently face? But before researchers can investigate in Antarctica, last-minute testing is taking place here, over 2,000 miles away, in the countryside of New Zealand, with a brand new drill.
Yeah, it's a shakedown. We've got a few leaking connections and things that don't quite fit as well as they need to, a little bit of modifications required. Pretty common with a brand new piece of equipment.
Weighing in at a whopping 40 tons, this mechanized marvel is as heavy as a humpback whale, and just as large. Towering some 5 stories high, the giant rig will soon dwarf everything in sight, except the ice.
This will be the largest drill rig in Antarctica that's used on land.
And this mammoth rig can drill in more than one place. That's because it's mounted on a sled.
I think it probably is unusual. All of the equipment is on sledges, so in Antarctica we pull it all with big bulldozers.
It's been specially designed to drill from the ice in order to extract hidden secrets from beneath Antarctica itself. This unique multinational enterprise is called ANDRIL, the Antarctic Drilling Project. For team leader David Harwood, it's a dream come true.
As a scientist, there's a passion. There's a passion that comes in trying to figure this out, trying to identify what has been the past history of the ice sheet, and wondering what the future might hold.
Soon, the giant drill will be dismantled and ready for a long sea voyage.
We'll then start the final screening process, and will get you to take your extreme cold weather jackets off.
But now, the ANDRIL team gathers at Christchurch, New Zealand, for the 6-hour flight to Antarctica in a C-17 cargo plane, jam-packed with people and gear. Their flight passes over the Trans-Antarctic Mountains, which divide the continent into 2 regions, with colossal glaciers called ice sheets blanketing both. The giant East Antarctic ice sheet is 10 times the size of the West. It's frozen firmly to bedrock, high above the sea, and in some places, the ice towers almost 3 miles into the sky. The smaller West Antarctic ice sheet is less stable. That's because it rests on land well below sea level, and it extends hundreds of miles over the ocean in floating ice shelves. It's likely East and West Antarctica will respond very differently to a warming world. The ANDRIL team touches down in the west on an icy runway at McMurdo Station, the largest U.S. research base in Antarctica. As David Harwood and Richard Levy step out onto the ice, the first thing they notice is the weather.
The breeze is a bit chilly, but it's beautiful. It's good to be back.
It's October, springtime, and it's minus 20 degrees.
It's the earliest I've ever been down to Antarctica, and it's very cold. When the wind picks up, it's rather an unpleasant place to be working. When the wind isn't blowing and the sun's shining, it's actually really quite nice, but very cold.
But even a sunny afternoon can turn nasty at a moment's notice.
It's a beautiful day!
Come on, guys!
McMurdo Station has been a vital hub of research for over half a century. What began as a tiny outpost has over the years grown into a small town. McMurdo houses a population of 200 people year-round. But during the research season, it becomes home base for over 1,000. Every year, McMurdo supports scores of research projects, providing lab facilities, food and supplies, and survival training for teams of scientists who will head out to remote field camps. This season, Those numbers include the Andrill team of over 50 technicians and researchers from the US, New Zealand, Germany, and Italy. Andrill is funded by their governments and the National Science Foundation.
There's probably a week at least of work in McMurdo where we have to get all of our gear sorted out, getting everything we need in order to be able to work and survive out in the field.
As they gather supplies for more than a month on the ice, one item is in high demand.
Sugar actually heats your body. It gives you quick energy, especially if you're like freezing and we expect to be very cold. We don't really know how much chocolate is enough. We can take up to 560 candy bars, but I'm looking at this and I'm already getting queasy. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can eat this or not.
Hey, David!
As Andrill researchers prepare for life in the field, they join hundreds of other scientists fanning out across Antarctica, and many are focused on the same question. Could Antarctica be headed for a meltdown?
Over here is Mount Boreas.
We're going to have a lot of scientists working together
There is a little bit of volcanic ash.
and challenging each other's theories, challenging what we know.
Look at that.
As a community, we're going to find the answers.
But the continent won't give up its secrets easily. The stark beauty of Antarctica masks a treacherous nature. More than 70% of all the fresh water in the world is harbored here. But most of that water is frozen. And with less precipitation than the Sahara, Antarctica is the driest desert on Earth. Raging winds of up to 200 miles per hour sometimes blast the frozen terrain, where temperatures can drop to 100 degrees below zero. Only during the short Antarctic summer can most researchers gather precious scientific data from this giant mystery continent.
Coming up at 292 for drift. Copy. Wait, right. That's all that, and should be.
A 4-hour flight and 400 miles from McMurdo is the center of the West Antarctic ice sheet. And for one team, this is the best way to find out about the past.
This is the side of a snow pit. It's a thin wall between two pits. The other side is open so light can shine through. And you can really see the different layers in the pit. So this is 1 year's worth of snow accumulation, and there's a second year's worth of snow accumulation here below it. 2 years of record right here in the snow pit. Of course, we want to go back a lot further in time than that. In order to do that, we can't just use shovels and chainsaws like we did here, so we have to use a drill.
Ken Taylor's team is drilling through ice. Their goal is to gather samples from the nearly 2-mile-thick West Antarctic ice sheet. And the deeper they go, the further back in time they travel.
Here, we're at about 480 meters deep right now. This is right around the time when Jesus lived. It's right about 0 AD, right when BC years turned into AD years.
These ice cores contain tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere that were trapped each year as the snow was compressed into ice.
Ah, nice bubbles in this one. That's ancient air in there. When we crush samples like this, that'll get the gas out of there and we can sample the ancient atmosphere. We can also get a record of how things like temperature and sea ice changed in the past. And by combining these different records, we can understand how the climate system has operated in the past.
But the ice record, valuable as it is, only goes back about 800,000 years, a tiny fraction of geologic time. To get a more complete picture of Antarctica's climate history, you have to drill farther back in time. And that's what the Andrill team is trying to do. They want to paint a picture of Antarctica as it changed from warm to cold millions of years ago. In order to do that, Andrill will have to drill deep into the Earth. But finding the right location is a major challenge on a continent covered by ice. And even in those few places where the ice has receded, it's still not easy. Andrill's David Harwood and Richard Levy are searching for places to drill. But as they fly over a field of rubble, They see that gathering evidence for a chronological history is not possible here. Something has stirred things up, and that something is the ice itself. That's because ice moves. For tens of millions of years, glaciers have slowly scoured the land, gobbling up rocks and debris and spreading them all across the landscape in random order.
This we call glacial paleontology. Some call it garbage pile paleontology because we're looking and sorting through these moraines to try to get pieces of information that the ice sheet has brought to us.
A moraine is the chaotic accumulation of rocks and debris deposited by glacial movement.
This one here actually has abundant shell fossils.
This shell, brought here by a glacier, comes from a time when the continent was warmer and water ran through these valleys. This landscape is a treasure trove of Antarctica's climate.